Good morning and welcome to Rise and Shine Sundays. My name is Jamie Rich. I'm your host, where each Sunday we wake up to what's emerging around a central inquiry, an open inquiry of which you are a part of. This week we're exploring a question about relationships. Specifically, what value are you receiving in your relationships? If you're like me or many of the people that I know, you may be exhausted by some of your relationships. You may find yourself that you've been giving, supporting, and getting nothing back that sustains you. Or maybe you are getting things like invitations or attention, requests, clicks, likes, but all of those things don't really feed you. You want to receive something in return, and you're not being selfish, that's human. But where most people get stuck, they either keep giving until they're depleted, or they start keeping score, which turns every relationship transactional. Well, as you probably have experienced, both of those approaches fail. You end up sometimes feeling resentful or calculating. So, we're inviting you in this conversation this morning to think about what if the problem isn't wanting to receive, it's not knowing what a reciprocal value in relationships actually looks like, right? What if you've been measuring the wrong things? So, again, this morning we're asking, what does reciprocal value actually look like? And how do you know when you're in a relationship that is actually feeding you rather than draining you? And joining me this morning, as I am always so happy to do, is in our roundtable discussion this morning are my dear friends Sang Di, Ray Gio, and Ali. And if you're watching us live, please say hello in the chat on YouTube, and we'll bring you into the conversation. So let's explore this together this morning, shall we? Good morning. And who has a thought emerging around this whole idea that, has anyone in this room ever felt like they were not in a relationship where they felt valued? Ollie, what's going on?
Yes, and also I realized that as always, there is a part within me and a part within the others. Because if I don't set up my boundaries, if I don't clearly set up the relationship with the things that I would like to receive, how will I be satisfied of this relationship if I realize that it's not what this relationship is aimed for? If I don't define clearly what is a relationship and what does mean reciprocal, and what I would like to receive if I give something to this relationship.
And just because somebody has brought up what does this word mean and what does this word mean, my little brain wants to turn to Sang to kind of give us some meaning and context as we start our conversation this morning.
Well, one, I'm going to say relationships are how so relationships are very tricky, right? So this is a very layered topic, right? Because you have relationships everywhere. It starts with relationships with your parents, it goes from there, it goes from with your teachers, with friends, and then into the co-working, and then working with people. So there's so many different realms of relationships. And I think you being able, a person yourself, like being able to define, I'm always going to go back to self. Who are you in the relationship? Right? Because we typically want to expect other things from other people. And so you being able to define what is a friendship, right? What is this relationship I want to have with my coworker? There are people who may not talk to their parents for whatever reasons. And it could be, is something missing? Is there something I can do to mend the gap here? And it may be something that you get to honor for yourself. And I think you being a person being able to define for themselves what is a relationship, right?
Right.
What early going back and again, there's no clear definition for this one for sure, simply because everyone's definition is vastly different. Because the ones I have with my dad, is very different than many people have with their dad, right? But it's also the same. So just I think defining what you have with your, what does relationship mean to you?
Right. And it's so funny when you mention that, it seems overwhelming because you're right, we cannot have a one size fits all definition of a relationship. And that also invites us to begin to look at what the reciprocal value is. I mean, I love going to the grocery store, and I'm one of those people who still doesn't go to self checkout. There are certain checkout people who work there that I like to interact with, and I receive something in that relationship. It makes me feel better. I feel seen. I want to know what's happening in her life, but it's not on the same magnitude as the familial relationships that you're talking about. But I think that if you begin to look at who are you in your relationships, that begins to set the tone for, well, how do I define these different relationships? Is that sort of what's true for you, Ray?
Yeah, it's an both of you, Sang and Ollie, and of course you, Jamie, have brought up the interesting aspect of, okay, how do we define the relationship and what is our role in that relationship? And it's got me thinking about, do actually, what's the difference between the way I perceive it versus the person who I'm engaged with perceives it? And then there's that split between what they think is actually happening. So I'm still processing that from what I've experienced. I'll loop back to you.
No, that's great. And I'm sure that there are people in the chat that also have some thoughts about relationships. What have been those key elements, right? And it really does begin with sort of recognizing that there's a value in a relationship that flows both ways. And that, where I think a lot of people find themselves are in relationships that they feel trapped in, that are defined, that they don't feel like they have any, and I'm going to use this loaded word, which a lot of people use, they don't have any agency in the relationship, right? They're just in it. Like suddenly I'm in this relationship, and I got here and I have no idea how I got here. I know it's entangled. I know it's a mess. And, one of the things we talk about a lot in our inquiries here in Rise and Shine Sundays is there's a pause. And that pause comes when you check in with yourself, right? And this is one of those things that we're inviting you to take a look at. We've been looking a lot about things about self-transformation, but just like Sang so beautifully said a minute ago, this is an opportunity for you to really think about who you are and what these relationships may mean to you. Some relationships may be transactional, right? I mean, it's really okay. But when you feel like, and maybe I'm the only one who has felt this way, how do you switch that when you're in relationships that you don't understand how you got here, and you're certainly not sure how you can get out of them? Has that ever happened to you, Sang?
Oh yeah, again, so many different layers, because you do know, like, I have pockets of friends, right? Like, I know from conversations that I've had, who can I go talk to when I know I need a little pep talk? Right? And then it's, what kind of pep talk do I need? Do I need an in your face pep talk, or do I need a calm me down emotional pep talk? Right? And that's where that level of discernment for self comes in with, how do my friends show up for me, right? Or how does my circle, or whomever is in my circles, show up for me, for me to be able to say, okay, this is the person I would go to, right? For example, this week I was having a really challenging week this week, right? And I sent out a few messages, and I was completely stunned at some of the messages that I received, because I wasn't expecting the response I got, right? And so at first I was like, oh my gosh, what?
Wait, are you trying to tell me that people were actually giving you things back that you were not? Continue more. I've never heard this happen.
And so I was like, I wasn't expecting that from that person, right? And so I wanted to make it about myself, but I didn't. I was just like, okay, I showed this level of vulnerability, And this is how they showed up. And then I started looking at myself and going, okay, why have I come to this person before with this type of issue? And what has happened before? Right? Because now it's about me going, what did I do? Have I always gotten this response and I didn't realize it and I was super vulnerable today? And so when I went back to look through the responses, and I was like, oh, got it, understood. I was super vulnerable and shared with a few people who couldn't hold that emotional capacity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the responses I got were more slimy. I'm gonna use that.
Well, let's build on that. I mean, it's Sunday morning, and I feel like as somebody who was raised in the Christian tradition, there is that wonderful Bible adage of casting pearls before swine, right? And again, I don't want to make you think that all of your relationships, that the people who don't see you are swine, right? But there is that, again, saying, we've talked about this before, this somatic response that you get when you recognize the frequency of the relationships, the feedback loop that you're receiving is something that's just like, wow, is this what's always been happening to me in the relationship with person X that I was just not aware of, right? And it's part of that inventory that we sometimes have to do. We do a lot of inventory with ourselves, but we also need to kind of be doing some of that inventory work with our relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it starts again with that pause where, I don't know if anybody else that feels this way, but when you find that there's a relationship that's pushing your buttons and you think that it's all about you, that is not a particularly healthy path to go down, right?
Yes.
Because yes, there may be things that you have done, but just what you were illustrating so beautifully saying was there's this feedback that sometimes you're just, what? And it is that shock. I see as always, there's always a wonderful comment in the chat. We also expect the same from people all the time, even though we may not be aware of or realize what they may be dealing with at any given moment either, right? So this is one of the reasons why you would not want to continue to use the word casting pearls before swine.
Yes.
It's possible that people who do have the capacity to see, hear, and value you are just going through a really rough time themselves.
Yes.
So what is the cure for that particular thing is to be conscious and inquire back, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Again, that sort of self-inquiry that you do in the relationship, which please, I feel like I'm talking when there's stuff emerging here. So who'd like to chime in on this one? Ollie, go.
Yeah, back to the word definition, because it's really something that I enjoy so much. I realize that I don't know all, and I discover as long as you. So it's back and forth. Reciprocal, back and forth. It's like a rise and a fall, a pendulum, a wave. So it means that it's also nourishment. And as soon as you were talking about the inventory, I was thinking that it's like a gift that we say to that we send to people, and some are just presenting the object like this. Some it's poop. We never know what the object will be, and some are wrapping up the object. For me, it's also to realize if it's like, when do I talk with whom? If I'm going to talk with Sang, is it the right moment for me to talk with Sang? Do I need to wrap up in a certain way, or can I give Sang the gift? And so it's realized also that we are all having busy lives, ups and downs, and also it's for me it's the magic word is signposting. Before any communication, is like, can I talk with you right now? Are you also in emotional bandwidth to receive my message?
Right.
If it's really tough, but really back and forth is to send. It's like jumping in a cold pool we have to sense the weather before we are jumping into an icy, a cold pool, because else
Correct.
we are going to be not good received.
Yeah, and one of the things that we want to be clear on when we ask those questions, it's really helpful most of the time if those answers we're looking for are yes and no, as
Mhm.
opposed to, well, how do you feel about something? Oftentimes when we're in relationships where there's boundary setting, we also load in these questions in there where, well, tell me what you're feeling, tell me what you're doing. That's a really hard opener when you're really just trying to say something, hey, there's something going on with me. Is this a good time to um, uh, share, unload, doing whatever? Because that's the check-in that you want to do with somebody, and they should be able to give you a yes and no answer without having to no, I've had a really bad, just yes and no are really good responses in relationships where you're receiving some kind of reciprocal value, right? So I'm sure there's more that's emerging in the chat and emerging in people's minds. This morning, what we were talking about is what value are you really receiving in your relationships? And it's a question that we want to make sure that we're not talking about the pure transactional, like what am I getting from this, right? But recognizing what you are receiving in the relationships is often part of a reciprocal value exchange. What are you bringing to the relationship? And what our roundtable has been dancing with, if I can build with that, is what are some of these situations that we find ourselves in when has anyone ever kind of come to one of those situations where there is no reciprocal value in a relationship? I mean, have you ever had that awareness?
Oh yeah. Like I mean, there are times I think this is my biggest, when it comes to relationships, I have a rule of thumb for myself.
Okay.
If either one of us walks away from a conversation or realize we're walking away from multiple conversations and someone is walking away feeling depleted, there's something that's missing in that relationship, right? Because I know for myself, I can walk, because I know if please tell me if you have had this, is if you've been in a relation, in any kind of relationship, friendship, relationship, co-working ship, whatever it is, and you feel like you're giving and giving and giving, and you're getting nothing back, right? Or you're getting, they're just taking and taking, but then it's like, when do you stop giving?
Yeah.
Right?
And keep going.
No.
I was just going to.
And so, yeah, so then I personally look at it and go, if I walk away from a conversation or I walk away from, a meeting or something like that, and I feel depleted, then I know I've probably given way too much from my own discernment, right? But for whatever reason, I did. Now, if it comes down to the fact where, like, you're having a conversation and you can sense the other person feels that way, right? There's another way to do that in that energy field. And you bring up a conversation, say, is everything okay? Am I, because I've gone to people and asked specifically, hey, so do I always come in and do this? Because if you do, I need you to let me know. And I think creating that space for them to say and be open, because sometimes the people, like what Stacy said in the chat, is people are going through things and don't necessarily want to tell you, and that's perfectly fine. But being able to say, are you sure everything is okay? I just want to make sure, because your well-being is what's the most important.
Yeah.
But being able to definitely walk away feeling fulfilled from conversations and things like that, because once there's something missing, there's then something to look at for sure. It's my own.
Well, and there are often times when you're in a relationship where you realize that shifting your perspective alone isn't going to fix it, right? And I realize that I tend not to use the word fix, but when you've had the awareness where there is no reciprocal value, meaning whatever you're receiving and whatever you're giving, whatever you're receiving, whatever they're giving, and then what you're giving back is not of any value, where it is the depletion, whatever, shifting your perspective. Somebody said something to me this week that was a very challenging phrase to hear. And I actually kind of want to be able to invite people in the chat, invite people if you're watching this after we're live to kind of ring in on, is oftentimes when we are recognizing that certain relationships have not been in a reciprocal value, we sometimes have to walk away and watch things die on the vine. When we can no longer feed something without depleting ourselves, we're not necessarily required to go, I'm ending this relationship, it's over, I'm done, go through all of this drama, sometimes, and I don't know if anyone else has had any thoughts about this, about in order for you to continue doing what you're doing and for them to do it, the relationship has to die on the vine. Ollie.
It's really tough what you say because words have energies. I realize it's also to realize that it's and I also have thoughts about what we taught in the Soul Saturday, the new beginnings, and at some point is also having a check each year or each month at the time that you decide, is this a relationship that I want to nurture or not? Because it's like a gardener that is, it's a bit crazy metaphor, so as yours, but it's a gardener that is try to have a garden, but some plants are not fit for the garden, like the climate, and at some point it's like, does it worth for me to try 1 time, 5 times, 1,000 times to try to have this plant in my garden if it's never going to grow? So at some point, is to realize that time, water is important, and energy. And at some point, it's like there is no. I think there is
No.
also no good or bad relationships.
Right. And
It's
the
about,
garden,
yeah.
go ahead. Was there something else you wanted to close with?
Well, I'm going to close by the fact that it's okay. It's okay if we decide to not pursue something because it costs us
Correct.
ourselves energy and time.
Correct. And the garden metaphor could not be any more apt. I mean, it really is. And it's something that actually, because again, we're introducing the idea of energy, right? The idea of, I said, when a relationship dies on the vine. Jessica put something in the chat, which I think is important. It's tough to be in that moment, especially if we feel that walking away somehow speaks to who we are as a person. And that's where I think the gardener metaphor is really helpful, is, you aren't so much giving up, right? But also jumping into that role of the garden to make sure, am I giving the correct amount of energy to something, right? Am I really, we want to personify it, but just like a gardener would say, this was not the right soil. This was the time. And also to build on this metaphor, the value of the relationship nurtures the soil from which new relationships will grow. Ray, you were nodding on that one, right?
Yeah, what you guys have just shared is actually quite interesting. As I realized that I haven't done as much self-assessment as I should in these relationships, and I think what you just said is letting something die on the vine. What I discovered and what Sang said is that the amount of energy that I expended on certain situations of relationships was valuable to me because I like helping people and I like giving. Mm-hmm. But you reach a point where nothing comes back. It's essentially a one-way flow. And then when I discovered by pausing, I think like by creating a pause to see what what's going to happen. And quite often what happened was crickets, nothing. Mm-hmm. So essentially the individuals basically were just saying, oh yeah, I'll take it if you're giving it. But they didn't even, what I love of what you were saying is like, there was no inquiry back. Like, oh, is there something going on with you? Or I really love it when you call me out of nowhere.
Yes.
and then we do something. So that was kind of interesting, and quite often the pause turned into the long silence. So then I realized my energy needed to be relocated, moved on to something else, and discovering it. But I think that's the interesting thing is the pause is needed, the self-assessment is needed, the ability to, as Ollie's just shared, it doesn't really say negative things. It just says that you've evaluated, but in conjunction with others. You didn't say I'm stopping and the hell with them. Well, you could, but so I think it's an interesting blend of playing with those elements and then figuring out, what was the reciprocal value there? I gave, but I got limited value back.
Saying, was there something more that you wanted to add? Because there's some interesting comments in the chat I want to get to next.
Oh no, I do, but go ahead and go in the comments because.
Well, one of the things our dear friend Stacy is reminding us is that some relationships also might need to hibernate for a while. And that's a really powerful idea because there is a time in every season, right? And sometimes those of us who have been alive for longer than 20 years can recognize that there is this incredible value in relationships, right? Where there was a reciprocal value, time, distance took us apart. And what you're able to do, it's almost like a bulb that has been in hibernation that you bring into the new soil. Wow, this relationship that I had as a kid, I would never have been able to nurture all these years. But so many things have happened to me that this is the most valuable relationship to me now. I've changed, you've changed. We didn't end it. Do you know what I mean? We didn't go through the drama, of trying to just simply say, well, that purpose, that meaning, that closeness that was there had ended, but it wasn't necessary for me to push it away, right? It died on the vine. What else came forward? I mean, has anyone else had relationships like that, like, oh my gosh, we were that they've gone through a period of hibernation to grow into something really beautiful.
Yeah, I think one I'm going to say, I'll go back to the Girl Scout days.
Okay.
And not my Girl Scout days, but my daughter's Girl Scout days, I want to be clear. And really great friends. Like we're still friends to this day. We don't talk to each other every day. We see each other every once in a while. We'll check in every once in a while, right? But we knew that, I mean, at that point in the time, we talked to each other every day for like a year and a half, right? Because I worked in an office and that's how it worked. But being able to develop those friendships at that time, right? And going, was that a fit for that at the time? Yes. As people, they talk about seasons and things like that. But we've built something that is sustainable because we were transparent with each other. We shared things. We had that fulfillment with our friendship, our relationship that allowed us to continue to have what we have. And I think taking that and knowing, yes, thank you, Stacey, for saying that, and hibernating, just you're going to do your thing, I'm going to do my thing, doesn't mean that we're not still friends. And I think that sometimes people just want to cut off stuff so fast, right? It's not that we're not friends. It's just that you've gone here, you've gone there. We can still cheer each other on, no matter where we are in the space. And I still send cards and still do this, and they still do the same things. And so I think being in that space of fulfillment with your relationships is super huge, and keeping that connection and conversations going no matter what you've gone through in life and continue to go through in life.
Yeah, Ollie, did you want to add to this idea of hibernation and time and
Yes.
seasons?
For me, it's about also choosing our bandwidth. And we all grow. The Ollie of 20 years ago is hopefully not the Ollie of today. So a relationship that was 20 years ago is hibernating. I'm not really confident to revive this relationship because I tried at some point, but it was not feeling good because we all evolved, and the relationship was the Oli and the XYZ person of 20 years ago, which is not the same today. But I was thinking also it's about, I would like also to allow space for recognizing that even if relationships are ending or ended months, years, decades ago, it's to be grateful for these relationships, because we would probably not be the person that we are right now if we didn't have these relationships. Even crashing, the crash of a relationship can be also a lesson, and say, okay, I learned something from this crash, and from now on I decide to not react as I did, or I decide to set up a boundary that I was not setting upfront before. So it's any crash of relationship is not a failure. It's a redirection and a learning. Thank you.
Yeah, I just saw this comment just come in right now. It's a risk. You can grow together, but when and if you hibernate, there's a chance that the snow melts and you're no longer a fit for each other. And yeah, that's the truth. And I think that that's what that reciprocal value is all about, right? The preciousness of relationships comes down to the fact that, um, you know, and I don't mean to fall into cliches in this particular moment in time, but there is that question: if you love someone, set them free, right? If this is a relationship that you do care about, and there isn't a way that you can continue to nurture it, it's okay to set it aside until you can, right? There was and again, uh, um, it goes back to that pause again of being able to go back to the definition of what the relationship is. Are we continuing this relationship just purely out of habit, right? Because we've known each other for a long while. It's like an old sweater. Well, old sweaters are great. That doesn't, it doesn't mean that you don't get to keep old sweaters. But if the old sweater that you put on is continuing to make you not feel good about yourself, and if the old sweater makes you feel, there's all of this resentment that begins to build up. And sometimes it's okay to put that. I realize that we danced from the garden to the closet in terms of metaphors, but it's okay to keep those things there that are precious. You don't have to toss it out. You may just not take it out every day. Saying, what your thoughts on that? Not the closet metaphor, but what's sort of emerging from your thoughts about this?
Well, I think going back to something that Jessica said earlier today too, about who you are when you're having to walk away, and really grasping, like, do I walk away? Am I going to walk away? And what does that look like for me? Right? Because we're taught so much to depend on everybody else to give us our fulfillment, that we don't, again, look at ourselves to go, what do I need?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, if you value the relationship, and if you're willing to have that conversation with the other person to say, this is what's going on with me, this is what I feel, and I'd like to talk through this and XYZ. And I've worked with a few people that I have a little script that I've created. I don't know it verbatim because it's not something I teach every day, but it is something where you can have a mending conversation to say, let me talk about what's going on here, to one, see if we're on the same page, so to speak, right? Or is this relationship still fulfilling for you? And that's the thing, we don't typically have those types of conversations in friendships, right? We tend to have those in intimate relationships, right? But we don't have those in our friendships. And then we just kind of either let it fall off and we do whatever. And then there's that awkward reunion if you have one, right? But going back to what I will always say, who are you in the relationship? How do you show up? Right? how do you show up? And are you walking away fulfilled for yourself? Because if you're walking away fulfilled, typically another person is, because you're in a nice place of just being you. And that's the thing. When we're in relationships, sometimes we put on this, what do they call it? You put on a face, right? Or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put on, your face to like, oh, I want them to like me and da 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 da. And you're just like, but what if you're just you all the time? And oh my gosh, there's a quote. I watched a movie this week with Jessica. Actually, it was Anne of Green Gables. Never seen the movie at all. Okay, I spent the whole day watching it. Or the whole afternoon watching it. It was absolutely great. And one of the things that Anne said, if anybody's watched it again, first time, I'm going to watch it again, is as she makes me love her, and I like people who make me love them. It saves me so much trouble in making myself love them.
Yeah, it's much easier to fall in love with people that you actually like. As a gay man, I can tell you the legions of men that I have talked to over the years that are trying to like people that they are attracted to. But that is a whole nother conversation. But again, that's that inventory. That's that recognition of the reciprocal value. And, that pause that, I don't know if anyone else has said this in a relationship, but sometimes things need to be renegotiated, right? Because when you've grown together through a common experience, some people don't want to grow any further, right?
Right.
And it's okay for that to happen, right? Like there are people that I no longer see because, again, I didn't have the language, let it die on the vine, because that almost was too hard for me to sort of understand what that really meant. But I would be happy to renegotiate some relationships that I've had in my past if we can restore a reciprocal value. But if we're moving through from habit, and when I'm bypassing my resentment and the things, well, this person was kind of a we ended up, and again, I realize we're dancing close to intimate personal relationships, right? But what I really want to keep this relationship grounded in is that idea that pause that we're asking you to invite is, what value are you really receiving in your relationships? And that doesn't put you in this position of being manipulative or being somehow transactional. You're really beginning to understand what that loop is all about between you and the other person. Ray, I'm going to single you out just because I feel like we haven't heard from you in a while.
No, I always enjoy listening and then starting to process what's being exchanged and trying to put it all together. And I really like where we've ended up, where essentially in the relationship, it's the energy flow and the harmony of that energy flow. So then the minute you start thinking about it in those terms, it's less transactional, but then you start to say, is it going too much in one direction? And how fulfilling is that? I love that word. As well as, can I have a deeper conversation about this relationship? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, or it doesn't go anywhere. So I think that the harmony means a lot to me, in the sense of, the type of relationships that I have. Some of it is pretty obviously transactional, but the harmony ones are the ones that you really value.
And it's okay, again, if we're taking inventory, some people may give you that calming presence. Some people, relationships you have are there to challenge you. I mean, when I did a podcast interview this week that was really challenging for me, because this is not a person that I would necessarily resonate with. I didn't have that harmony frequency with, but I went into it consciously knowing I'm doing this because this person is going to challenge me. Right. And so I can receive the value of the challenge. And it's okay. Doesn't make it transactional. Right. But it makes it conscious, right? Where I'm aware of, I'm providing this for him, but I'm also receiving a challenge for myself. You laughed saying, so there's got to be a story there somewhere.
Well, because I think it's perfect. It's a perfect example of this whole conversation, right? Is because he was providing something that you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, you wanted to be challenged. He also is on a platform where you also get to talk about whatever it is you were talking about, right? And you didn't go in going, I think I'm going to make this a transactional relationship today, right? It wasn't that. And I love this language that you that I'm going to challenge all of you about the language, right? Because if you notice, Jamie will use reciprocal value. I use fulfillment, right? And then it was interesting with negotiation, because negotiation, everything sounds very masculine and very transactional, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
So when you said, I went into this, I wanted to be challenged, right? And then were you challenged?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were challenged because you wanted to be challenged. If you had went in thinking, oh, this energy, this guy, blah, 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 it wouldn't have been a good time.
No.
But you had an intention, and that's the biggest key when you're in any kind of conversation, any kind of relationship. And it's never, I don't ever go into relationships going, I wonder what Jamie's going to do for me today, right? Or anything like that. Or what is Ray going to give me today? What can I get Ray to give me today, right? Like, it's never that. It's something within self. What does Ray have that I also want? And the only way I'm going to be able to get that is if I talk to Ray.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I know if I want to know about books or I want to know about certain things, I'm going to go to Ray. If I want to know about words, I'm going to go to Ollie, right? I want to know about community and how community events come together and how to build all those types of things. I'm going to Jamie, right? Like, what if I want something, but also what am I giving? Right? And it's, what am I giving? How can I also, and again, it's going to go back to one of my all-time favorite books of all ever, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Been listening to it all week again for the last 2 weeks. It's one of my staples. And it is just so good in terms of just be a good human. And when you're just a good human, things will just fall into place.
Right.
Now, there are times when we are challenged, and I think this is where this comes in. We are challenged because people have done us wrong. People have done things to us and we have felt a certain way, and then we are not able to express how we feel about what that is.
Mhm.
Right? Yeah. So I think that you shared.
No, it's so well phrased. And speaking of good humans, the good human from Belgium had his hand up. So what was it wanting to come out?
Well, it's really a blessing because the more I listen to you, the more I'm intentionally wanting to define what is a relationship, because it's also about what do I want to get from this person, and also what do I want to give back. It's a relationship, so it's about back and forth. I receive and I give, and we all elevate, rise and shine. And so that for me, it's also about, there are relationships that we are tied to, family, and there are relationships that we can say, okay, this person is not enough emotional intelligence for me. I wish him well, but I'm not going to have meetings with this person.
Right.
But it's a choice that we can all have.
Yeah, it is a choice, but both answers matter.
Yes.
Right? Because it's from that awareness that you can move, right? And again, it's that awareness lets you invest in relationships that sustain you instead of ones that only deplete you, right? And so it's not about making the other person wrong. This is not about, naming, judging, this is not about how I'm still going to probably never live down the fact that I said legions of men, according to my friend Stacy. But it is just to be able to get you to that conscious moment, right? And again, what's great about working from that awareness is you may discover another dimension in a relationship if you bring a conscious awareness to it, right? Like, I know we've been going through this habit where we've been discussing X, Y, and Z. Is there a way that this relationship could deepen, grow? And I get it saying, I'm a hyper verbal person, so I will ask people things. But sometimes you just want to be with people who make you feel a certain way.
Mhm.
You can share a common experience with that. There's a lot of nonverbal behavior that happens in a really good relationship. This is a person whom I can take a walk. This is a person who provides me with something that we can both enjoy together. Like there's people that you go to the movies with, right? And I think it's, again, recognizing the dimensionality is one thing, that each relationship may have its own unique, and I'm going to use my term, reciprocal value, right? Um, but it begins with being conscious of whether or not that is still something that is feeding you or something that is depleting you. We now have that wonderful moment that takes place here on Rise and Shine Sundays.
Yeah, because there's so many layers to what this looks like, right? In terms of your relationships, with intimate relationships, whether it's your friendships, you have with your parents, your kids, your aunts, your family, anybody, right? Anytime you're having that type of conversation and creating that connection, right? Because it's all about connection. We all want to feel connected. We're all connected. It's just a matter of how we allow the conversations to open up or provide. And I know a big word in the workspace right now is psychological safety. And so when you think about psychological safety in relationships that you have with your counterparts of whatever sorts, what does that look like for you? What do you need to be psychologically safe in a conversation that you're having? Because we were not taught to have conversations like this back in the day, right? It was I've literally had this conversation all this week. Have thick skin, do this, do that, don't do that. And it's like, I was talking about it this morning where I wasn't allowed to speak, right? I was not allowed to speak as a child. I was not allowed to talk about my feelings. I was not allowed to talk about anything. If I had feelings, I got in trouble. I got made fun of, like whatever it was at home, right? At home. This was not outside the home. This was at home, right? So if I'm having it in home, I'm expecting it when I leave the home. Right. And so then what happened? I left the home. I'm not speaking about it. I'm writing about it because that's what I did when I was at home. I couldn't speak, so I wrote. But then I was violated when my diaries and journals, back in the day when it was a diary, right, was violated because someone read it. Now I can't read or speak my things. And it was like, what does that look like? And being able to go to your friends and say, hey, this is what I have going on, or going to someone and saying, hey, this is what I have. Or even if it's like, who's celebrating with you, right? When you have something to celebrate, and I know they talk about this in all the quotes and things like that. When you celebrate something and you're excited about something, how do others celebrate with you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. And again, we also have to remember that if we go back to Mel Robbins, I always want to say Mel Gibson. Anyway, Mel Robbins' book, Let Them, is they get to show up that way. That's cool. Right? I know one of some people's favorite books, The 4 Agreements, Don't Take It Personal, right? Is one of those things that's the hardest thing to do because we always want to take it personal. Right. And if we don't make it about us and we come back and go back to the things we've talked about before, is going to the place of curiosity. Right. Well, tell me, what did you mean by that? Or, the other day, was everything okay because you weren't acting normal? Right. Like, we get to recognize when certain things and allow people, because sometimes people may be going through things. They may be having the same thoughts you're having, where I can't talk to so-and-so. XYZ is happening. Right. So create a door opening for them to be able to talk about it.
Right.
Them that psychological safety, create that, what we call now a safe space, but which I think, again, we have to define what a safe space is, because now a safe space is very different for everyone than what,
right,
quote unquote, used to be like in a safe. Right. So really, I think now defining, what does that look like? What does this stand for? And again, it goes back to self with those relationships.
Correct.
Right.
And that intensity that you're bringing to making sure that people construct these containers for safe relationships is born of the experience that you've had. So I'm going to flip this back to the garden metaphor, which is you've been able to take those fragments that were not feeding, nurturing, or sustaining you, and use them from the soil as to which to grow these new relationships. Right? You incorporated it. You didn't disconnect from it. You used that awareness to foster new ideas for growing your relationships. And again, our question this week, I realize that we've, as we've always seem to be able to do, we could continue this discussion for a long time, but some of the central themes that have really emerged around for us this morning, and I'm sorry, I want to toss in one real, there's been so many things that are emerging in the chat right now, but I really want to bring in one of this comment here. You know, what Sang spoke of going to this person X and another for Y is relationship is a resource, right? Not consumption, but for greater consciousness and consulting myself into my highest expression. And if we were able to have that as a guiding light, right, to be able to have that pause where we can consciously look at a relationship as resource, which is a beautiful way of saying what we're all talking about today. This whole idea of recognizing that there are these resources that are available to you in terms of the relationships that you have, and that if you look at them as transactions where you're like, what am I getting from this? What am I, it just, can I use the term screws the pooch? I guess I can. It's Rise and Shine Sunday. But you're not leading into the highest expression. You are going into judgment, blame. And again, those things may be important for you to do what Ollie was asking us to do at the very beginning, which was to establish boundaries in this. But again, I want to make sure that this invitation of inquiry is to achieve that relationship is a resource, right? And it's a resource that should actually be, if you will, nurturing to both of the people who are in that relationship, right? There may be transactions that are a part of it, but there are also deeper things involved. I am so appreciative of the inquiry this morning. I'm so appreciative of Ollie for you for continuing to make sure that the chat serves as a vital source. We are going to be moving this conversation during the month of April into a new space that we're going to be calling the Sphere. We'll still be continuing to broadcast thanks to the wonderful people in the Breakthrough Show Network, but we're actually going to be expanding our container for these conversations to allow more of you to come into a room and a space with us. So we're inviting you to look at the reciprocal value that you may be receiving on Sunday mornings and maybe join us. You can continue to join us on YouTube, courtesy of the Breakthrough Show Network, but we're also going to be having a space where we can kind of expand our inquiry. So it is that point where I turn to Ray and I say, Ray, was there anything that we would like to continue to explore as we are wrapping up our time together?
No, I think you've covered it so nicely, and I was looking at the image that's behind our faces. The sphere itself is the connecting in of everybody, and that's what we're hoping to do, and that's what's so enjoyable for me to be part of this group and those in chat, is we're hoping to expand the sphere a bit and connect in, and I just love the fact that Sang provided so many quotes and resources. One that came to mind as she was doing that is Stephen Covey basically saying, seek to understand and seek to be understood. So that reciprocal exchange of value. And I love the fact that relationships and conversations have value. So toss it over to others now.
Ollie.
Well, it's a great atmosphere to be here in my space and in your spaces. And I love this experience. And I would like also to say, to wrap up, because we can talk for hours, to wrap up is to really recognize that it's also about how do we feel within our body. I'm not Yoda in this. I'm still evolving in this, but I recognize that my body is also a relationship in itself with billions of cells. And if I don't listen to my body, then I will miss some cues about is this moment with this person is depleting me or not. And then I would like also to say at the end, it's also relationships might have multiple forms, like face to face, physically, face to face online, or also writing an email, WhatsApp message, vocal, many ways, and even the non-verbal. Like if you enter into a space that is messy, it's probably not conducive for a great relationship also. So it's really to realize that there are multiple factors, verbal, non-verbal, of communication between a relationship, and to realize also, what do I want to feel? I meet Sang in 2 hours, by instance, just an example. How do I want to feel? Am I right? If I'm not feeling good, then I will postpone our meeting, because our time is really valuable. So it's also to recognize, am I the best self to be in the relationship at this given moment? Thank you.
You're welcome. And Sang, you have the rounding moment in our conversation today.
Well, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here always. One of the things I'm going to say from last is what I was talking about with a friend last night is, you've done, when you do your assessment of like, and I don't even like the word assessment, but when you kind of take a look at everything and say, how are my friendships showing up? How is this going? And at the end of the day, for myself, and I know for a lot of people, it's when you are showing up as yourself and you are showing up with your own integrity and you're showing up and you're facing things as they are rather than adding the emotion to them, because you're having to process those emotions yourself so that you're not emotionally charged when you're having conversation, is such a powerful awareness to have. It's such a super huge critical awareness piece to have of self that allows you to move through those different conversations and relationships and experiences and trials and tribulations of sorts, to be able to sit down and say, hey, this is what's going on, or this isn't working for me anymore. So
Well said.
great. I love it. I do want to make a little shameless plug here with I know Spirit Sessions is coming up after us, but also I know Teresa is getting ready to work on something called the Divine Feminine in April, and I'm super excited about it just because of the shift, the language, the experience, the energy of it is so profound. And so I can't wait to see how that unfolds and what emerges from there.
Amen. Amen to the emergence on Sunday mornings. And so that's what we do each week here at Rise and Shine Sundays, is we have an unscripted conversation around a central inquiry. If you have some ideas of topics you'd like for us to consider, you can reach us at riseandshinesundays.com. Please reach out. We're so grateful for the time of, and again, I will look back on this as one of those moments where there was some wonderful things emerging in the chat that really were so wonderfully woven in, and I'm so appreciative of that. So if you'd like to wake up with us on Sunday mornings, or whatever time it may be for you in the day, we will be back here next week at 10 a.m. Central Time for Rise and Shine Sundays. In the meantime, we give our thanks to the Breakthrough Show Network, and as Sang so beautifully said, coming up next at noon Eastern Time on the Breakthrough Show Network is Spirit Sessions. Goodbye for now, and we'll look forward to having you join us next week.